Um, I don't know. It's kind of important to a lot of people, and some people just don't care anymore. But yesterday, the Ontario government had a press conference, and they were talking about what they're going to do to make to cool off the housing market in Toronto, because you know that is the biggest issue facing us all right now is the humongous housing crisis in Toronto, which, in my opinion, doesn't really exist, and I'll tell you why. Fend for yourself, Dave. Good job, Kelly. I do the same thing. There's a lot of things that they mentioned in their press conference. They had about like 16 points or 17 points. The majority of them, quite honestly, aren't going to do anything to anything. A lot of them aren't going to. None of the policies that they introduced around reviewing the rules governing realtors and that sort of thing are going to do anything to calm the pricing that's happening in Toronto. So I'm not really even sure why that was part of the conversation yesterday. So talking about reviewing the REBA 2002, which is the rules and laws that govern realtors in Ontario, I'm all for it. I think that should be a regular, ongoing kind of thing. They should be looking at the rules and updating them as they go. Times change, people change, the needs of the public change, and the industry changes. So yeah, I'm all for that. I mean, I don't see how any of that's going to affect housing prices in Toronto. Having said that, the actual things that were in the provincial government's announcement that were supposed to affect the housing market in Toronto, the two most sort of contentious issues of all of them, one of them being rent control and the other one being a foreign buyer's tax. So those are the two things that really get people talking. I've been discussing this with a couple dozen real estate agents from all over the GTA and Hamilton and stuff over the past couple of days, both online and in person, over the phone, and just getting a lot of different opinions, getting their feeling as to what they think about different things. And I already know sort of where I'm coming from is this. And I want to sort of clear the air before we even get started here. I understand that we have a liberal government in charge, and they're not very popular. And to be honest, I think this whole real estate focus on the Toronto market and the housing bubble and stuff is really more than anything a distraction from hydro rates. About a month and a half ago or so, everybody was really angry about hydro rates, and suddenly we're not talking about that anymore. Suddenly we're all really concerned about the real estate market in Toronto, something that the provincial government really, in my opinion, can't and shouldn't do anything about. It's a natural market force that's happening there, in my opinion, and I'll get into that a little bit more. And we're using that as a distraction from something like hydro rates that the province can do something about, but they don't want to do something about, and they know that people are really angry with them about it, so they're distracting people with this other carrot of housing in the GTA. That's my general opinion. Having said that too, I don't think this is a liberal or conservative or New Democrat problem. So people who start framing the argument saying, oh, it's a liberal government this, it's a conservative government that, really, you just need to stop right now. What it is what is the issue at hand? What we need to do is identify what the issue is and what the best approach is to solve that problem, if we should even intervene. So that is really where I see this coming from. If you want to argue this on an ideological basis, in my opinion, you've already lost. Because you're wasting more time, and the politicians love it when you do it, by the way. Politicians love it when we, the taxpayers, the citizens of the country, sit here arguing with each other about being liberal and conservative and New Democrat and Green Party and this and that and the other thing, and we avoid the actual issues at hand. They love it. They love it. They love it when we distract each other with this. In the United States, you got the Republicans versus Democrats, and you're just entrenched about being right because you're Republican or because you're a Democrat, not because you've got an actual solution to an actual problem. So that's, you know what, that in my mind doesn't go anywhere. So if you want to have that kind of argument with me, I'm probably not going to respond. So don't bother making comments like that, because it's just ignorant on the face of it, in my opinion. What we need to do is really have a look at the problem here. And like I said, the two big issues that have come out were rent control and foreign buyers. Those are their two big ideas here. The easier one to tackle is foreign buyers. So we'll start with that one there. What the Ontario government wants to do is implement a 15% foreign buyers tax. So that means that people from other countries, doesn't matter what country it is, China is the one that sort of gets everybody's attention, gets everybody's blood boiling. But people from other countries that want to purchase property here in Canada will be slapped with a 15% tax on top of their purchase. So this isn't money that's going into the economy. This isn't people moving here and hiring contractors and creating some work and some jobs for people, or spending the money in the local economy, going to restaurants and actually doing something that's going to help the economy. This is the government just taking money. They could be taking it from foreigners or whatever, but it's another tax grab. And we're just turning a blind eye to it, and we're thinking that this is going to solve our problems. The reason everybody's chirping on this and thinking that this is going to solve our problems is because they've done it in Vancouver. So they did it in Vancouver to chill out the Vancouver housing market, which is also very under high demand and having these pricing wars and increases in pricing and all that sort of stuff. And it did have an effect. At least they thought it did. So what happened was they applied this 15% foreign buyers tax at a time when the market was already cooling off. So the market was already slowing down in Vancouver, and they applied this 15% foreign buyers tax, and then they took credit for the fact that the market was cooling down, saying that the tax did it, the tax solved the problem. However, what was happening was a natural slowing down of the market due to seasonal changes. At certain times of the year, the market's really busy. At other times of the year, it actually gets slower. And we can show you this on different graphs. In Hamilton area, the peak for our market is usually in May, June. The market peaks in May, June with the highest number of sales. Then it drops off throughout the summer and peaks again slightly in the second week of September, and then drops back off again. And that's just a natural cycle that's been happening in the Hamilton market for decades. That's what happened in Vancouver. On top of that was compounded by the fact that they had a really bad winter in BC. If you have any friends on Facebook out in BC, you saw all the pictures of all the snow that they got, places that normally just get rain, had tons of snow, and then they followed by tons of rain, and that keeps buyers at home. If we have a January here in Binbrook, or in Hamilton in general, where we have a lot of snow, we have a really quiet real estate market. About last year and this year, both Januaries, we hardly had any snow. So what happened? We had record sales in January. Why? Because people wanted to get out and look at houses because the weather wasn't too bad. So that's what happened in British Columbia. And I can back that up because, not uncoincidentally, the day before the Ontario government made this announcement, this article came out in the Vancouver Sun. And it basically says, impact of BC's foreign buyer tax wanes as March sales surge almost 50%. And this is not limited to Vancouver. If you read through the article, there are places throughout BC where sales have doubled. The article adds that in Burnaby, where the number of detached sales went from 47 in February to 100 in March, and apartment sales increased from 137 to 220. And then they're hearing people just colloquially or anecdotally, they're hearing people speaking again. It was 100,000 over asking and no conditions, and we still didn't get it. So this 15% foreign buyers tax basically stopped working, and this is what they want to do in Toronto. So you're looking at these. If there are true foreign speculators, investor buyers, this extra tax doesn't mean anything because they're coming with money, so it doesn't affect anybody that way. It's not going to do anything to slow down the market. It might scare people for a few minutes initially, but then it's going to pick right back up again. So this foreign buyers tax really, in my opinion, isn't going to work. And now the BC government's floating the idea of increasing the foreign buyers tax to 30%. So because that's what governments do. Their solution to everything is to tax it. So now we're just going to tax this thing even more, and that's going to scare away the foreign speculators and buyers and all this kind of stuff. So in my opinion, the foreign buyers tax, it affects an extremely small part of the market compared to the overall market, and it really doesn't do anything in the long term to really affect housing prices anywhere. The other really contentious issue that came up yesterday was the expansion of rent controls. I'll give you a little bit of background. Back in the 1970s, the government of the day decided to institute rent controls, which put a cap on how much a landlord can increase rent on an annual basis. Here in Ontario, the cap is 2.5%, but usually the number is much lower, and the Rent and Tenants Board every year in August, I believe it is, comes up with a certain percentage. It could be 1.2%, could be 0.8%, whatever percentage I think it happens to be, and that will be the cap, that will be the maximum that you're allowed to increase somebody's rent. Now I realize that there are two sides to this story. I've rented apartments in my younger days, so I know where you're coming from in that perspective. that they want to protect people who are renting homes and from massive increases in their rent and not being able to afford their rent and have to find another place to live. From the other perspective, what ended up happening, at least here in Ontario, and this is information that I get from hearing stories from realtors that have been around for 20, 30 years or more, essentially apartment building construction just stopped. There's a lot of examples here in Hamilton, out in Stony Creek especially, where there was plans to build anywhere from 8 to 10 apartment buildings in a certain area, and they were about halfway through constructing the second building when rent controls came into effect. So the companies that were building these buildings just decided to stop building them because the economics weren't there. You couldn't support these buildings. And you can see it if you can go into a lot of apartment buildings these days, and you'll see that they look like they have 70s or 80s decor still. Well, there's a reason for that. They're not making enough money from collecting rents to be able to maintain the buildings. So the buildings start to fall into disrepair, and essentially you end up becoming a slumlord. You're living in these buildings that have 30-year-old carpets and haven't been painted in 2 decades. You put off repairs as long as you can because you're just not making enough money, because people are still paying rent based on the fact that they took possession of the apartment back in the 80s or back in the 90s, and they've been living there ever since. And you've been limited to a 1% increase every year for the past 20 years. Now, there are some exceptions there. You can make a couple of pleas to the rent board and all this kind of thing to do certain increases at certain times, but they're very limited. Again, the fact that nobody kept building apartment buildings will tell you all you need to know. Because these people who are building, and it could be me, it could be you, that are putting our money together to invest and to build a building, or developers and that sort of thing, we want to see a return on that investment. If we don't see a good return on that investment, we'll take that money and we'll go somewhere else where we will get a good return on that investment. That's just the way the market works. So if you want to put rent controls in place and people can't see that they're going to make money on it, they're just not going to invest money on it. And to further that point, one of the largest owners of apartment rental properties in Hamilton, probably about a decade ago or so, decided to sell them all. They converted them all into condominiums and sold off the properties because they just weren't making enough money on the rentals to maintain their buildings and to keep a healthy bottom line for themselves. So earlier in the 90s, the government realized that this was putting the handcuffs on developers from building apartment buildings. It increased the demand for apartment buildings because the vacancy rates were now less than 2% because it just didn't have enough apartments for people to find, but the demand was increasing. So they put a moratorium on it. They put an exemption saying that if you build a building specifically for rental purposes from 1991 forward, rent control would not apply. And guess what happened? People started building apartment buildings again. People started building rental properties again because now the economics supported it. So now what the government has done is said that they're going to expand rent controls even to those buildings. So you had these investors, these developers, regular people like you and I putting our money into these things, trying to make money on it, with the expectation that we didn't have to worry about rent controls. And now the government's going to step in and say, actually, we lied. We're going to take all that back. We're going to slap down rent controls, and then anything going forward is going to have to comply with rent controls as well. So what's going to happen? People are going to stop building apartment buildings. People are going to stop building rental properties. People are going to convert existing rental properties into condominiums and other properties and sell them off because they can't make enough money to maintain them. So this is not helping anybody. I understand the plea, but from the other side about controlling your monthly expenses and all that kind of stuff. But this goes to the larger question, I think. And I think the crux of the issue is what do we see the role of our government being? Is it the job of our government to make sure that somebody earning $30,000, $40,000 a year can afford a house in Toronto? Is that what we want them to do? Is it the role of our government to ensure that somebody who's earning $20,000, $30,000, or whatever the amount of money is, $60,000, $80,000, $90,000 a year, can afford to live here in Hamilton or in St. Catharines or anywhere in this country? And my opinion is no. It's not the role of our government to make sure that you can afford to buy a house in a specific location in Canada. Yes, lots of people want to live in Toronto. Lots of people love Toronto, and they say, I really want to live there, I have friends there, they got the Blue Jays, they got the Leafs, I love it. Well, if you want to live there, you got to be able to afford to live there. Plain and simple. You got to make enough money that will allow you to purchase a place, to rent a home, or whatever it is, to be able to live there. And if you can't do that, then you can't live there. you have no specific right, I believe, as a Canadian citizen, as a taxpayer, as anything else, you do not have a specific right to live in a specific place. The fact that I was born and raised and spent my entire life here in Hamilton doesn't give me any specific right to be able to buy and live in a house here in Hamilton if I can't afford to do so. And it's not the government's, either whether it's the city, the province, or the federal government's job to step in to assist me in any way to let me live here. Now, there are some caveats to that social housing comes into play, and I am a supporter of social housing. I don't have an issue with social housing in any way whatsoever. I believe in a limited form of social housing where we use social housing as a means to help people who have problems. But this doesn't go on forever, in my opinion. This is a short sort of boost that you can give people to help them out. It's just like unemployment insurance and stuff. It's a limited amount of time where you receive this assistance so you can get yourself going, get the help you need if you're dealing with addictions and other things, or mental illnesses and that sort of thing, and then get yourself stable, talk to financial planners, whatever it is that you need to do so that you can then move forward from there and move into regular housing, and other people can come into the social housing who need that service. I have absolutely nothing against that whatsoever. My general take on life is I'm probably fiscally, economically pretty conservative, but socially pretty liberal. And I don't mean this as a reference to the political parties. I mean this as a reference to political philosophy in general, not the specific Canadian Conservative Party or the Canadian Liberal Party or anything like that, because they're all over the place. But that's the way I see it. I mean, that's the bottom line. It's like, what role do we see our government playing here? What's happening in Toronto is that it's our fault. It's all our fault. As much as Maclean's magazine wants to say it's realtors' fault one week, the next week they want to say it's the bank's fault, the next week they want to say it's speculators' fault, the next week they want to say it's the government's fault, et cetera, et cetera. It's actually all our fault. And the reason why it's all our fault is because we've made an amazing country. Canada is an amazing place to live, and we just don't get it. We really don't get it. I mean, the extent to how awesome Canada is compared to many other countries around the world, it just doesn't hit you unless you've been there and come back. I had the privilege of speaking to a gentleman yesterday who purchased a rental property here in Hamilton, and he's close to retirement, so he'll be using the rental income to supplement his retirement. And his comment was he gets friends of his that come all the time from Bombay, from Singapore, from Hong Kong, and when they land in Toronto and they look around and they see how amazing the place is, and then they look at the cost of the housing, and it's cheap. Because in major cities like this around the world, the housing prices are much more expensive than they are here in Toronto, much more. And I get that what I think is scaring people more than anything is the pace at which things are happening. So prices are climbing at a very, very fast rate, which is what is scaring and unsettling people. Mainly because it's only been the last 3, 4, 5 years where people have really caught on to how amazing we have it here. I blame Huffington Post Canada because they keep posting clickbait articles about how amazing Canada is, how great it is. So now people are starting to take notice because Canadians in general are pretty quiet. We really don't raise the flag. We don't beat our chests like our neighbors to the south do about how awesome we are and stuff. We just go about being awesome. And so we created this amazing place. The streets are clean, the roads are well maintained, the cities are clean, there's lots of schools, we have a decent public education system, we have universal health care. If you live in Toronto, you can jump on a plane in a couple hours, you can be in Banff, or you can be in Victoria, or you can be in PEI, or you can be in Newfoundland, and you can drive a couple hours north, you can be in Muskoka, you can be in the Kawarthas, you can keep on going and be in Sudbury, or North Bay, or Thunder Bay, and you can see how absolutely beautiful this country is. We're a relatively peaceful country. We have a stable economic system, a stable banking system, a stable political system. So what's not to like? And as a result of that, people want to live here. I heard a realtor make a comment in one of these Facebook groups I'm a member of the other day that the population growth happening in Toronto is similar to taking the entire population of Peterborough every year and moving them to Toronto. Toronto in the GTA is growing by 107,000 people on average every single year, and will continue to do so until at least 2019 and probably beyond. The Canadian government has just increased the amount of immigrants that they're going to allow in the country every year from 260,000 to 300,000 people every year. So that's an additional 40,000 immigrants every single year that are going to be allowed to come into Canada. Not refugees. These are talking about immigrants, people who applied to come here, who've gone through the process, and have skills and other things that we find desirable, and they're going to move here and make their lives here. But that's an extra 40,000 people that are going to be coming to Canada every year. And guess what? They need a place to live. So if the provincial government really wants to make a difference, here's my plan. 2 things. Number 1, open up development. Let the developers develop. And this is not saying that you should take away the green belt. The green belt is its own little thing, and that's a separate issue altogether. There is plenty of land. There's plenty of plans already on the books that would increase our housing supply significantly. Even here in the GTA, if they need to even expropriate land in the GTA to build high-rises, you know what? I'm all for that too. Like, it's just, that's what we need to do more than anything. We need to build houses for people to live in. That's number 1. So you need to give the green light, take the handcuffs off, let the developers build. That's number 1. Number 2, improve our infrastructure. Make it easier for people, if they really have to work in Toronto, to get to Toronto. That means improving our highways, improving our GO Transit system, improving all of that so people can live in Hamilton, in Grimsby, in Stoney Creek, in Niagara, and get to the GTA quickly, affordably. Once you do that, that will take off a ton of pressure in Toronto. If you know that you could live outside the city but still get into the city quickly every single day, and it's not going to break your pocketbook and all that sort of stuff, of course people will move out of the city. Of course people will come live in Hamilton. Of course people will live in St. Catharines. And then it gives those cities even more opportunity to continue to develop their infrastructure and attract those businesses to relocate to other places or to get second, third locations in other places and create jobs in those places. And that will also take away the pressure from the GTA. They are relatively simple solutions that don't pander to anybody, that actually end up creating more jobs than anything else, construction-wise and everything else. And it's just simple. It's simple economics. It's supply and demand. Make the demand meet the supply, and everything will calm down. But anyways, thank you all for watching. Stay tuned for further videos as news and other things become available. I'll try to keep them shorter. I'll try to keep them a little bit more fun. I'll try to talk about other things too. Don't worry about it. But if you have any comments, please feel free to leave them below. Please feel free to private message me. Text me at 289-237-9896. Email me at tony@thegeekyagent.com. I'd love to hear your comments. I'll answer any questions you might have in a future video. I'm more than happy to do that as well. And as always, thank you for tuning in, and I'll talk to you soon.